I pressed the gauze harder against the general's throat, my fingers slick with his blood, and watched recognition flare in his eyes, the same eyes that had watched my execution in my previous life. You, he rasped, and I felt him try to pull away. Ashford? You're an Ashford. Yes, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart hammered. And if you don't let me save you, General Thorne, you'll bleed out in the next 3 minutes. Your choice. The battlefield screamed around us. Artillery fire shook the ground. Men were dying in the mud, their cries swallowed by the thunder of war. But in this moment, in this small crater where I dragged the wounded general, there was only silence between us. The silence of a man deciding whether to trust his enemy's daughter, and the silence of a woman who had died once already and refused to die again. He stopped fighting me. I worked quickly, my hands moving with a confidence that came from knowledge no 23-year-old field medic should possess. Because I wasn't just 23, I was also 34. The age I'd been when they'd executed me for treason, I didn't commit. In my first life, I had been Lady Alara Ashford, youngest daughter of Duke Cassius Ashford, a man who had sold our kingdom's military secrets to the enemy for gold. When his crimes were discovered, he blamed me. My own father had stood in court and testified that I had been his accomplice, that I had seduced officers for information, that every betrayal had been my idea. My mother had wept prettily and said she'd tried to raise me right, but I'd always been difficult. My sister Vivian had looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said nothing, which was worse than any lie. They'd hanged me in the public square. I remembered the rope, the crowd's jeers, General Thorne's face in the front row, hard and satisfied. He'd lost half his regiment because of the intelligence my father had sold. He'd wanted an Ashford to pay. Then I'd woken up as a child again, 10 years old, standing in my bedroom with tears on my cheeks from a nightmare that wasn't a nightmare at all. I'd had 13 years to plan since then, 13 years to watch my family's true nature with clear eyes, 13 years to make different choices. Hold still, I told the general now, threading a curved needle with practiced efficiency. The shrapnel had torn through the side of his neck, missing the carotid artery by centimeters. Lucky. Or perhaps fate giving me the chance I needed. He watched me work, his face pale but his eyes sharp. Where did you learn that? Field hospital training, I said, which was true. In this life, I'd run away from home at 18, 5 years earlier than my father had orchestrated my debut into society in my first life. I'd forged papers, changed my surname to my mother's maiden name, Laurent, and joined the Royal Medical Corps. I'd spent 5 years in field hospitals, learning surgery from doctors who were too desperate for hands to care about my noble accent or fine features. My family thought I was dead. I'd made sure of that. A faked drowning, a body that was never quite recovered. A tragedy to make my mother look sympathetic. They'd held a beautiful funeral. Vivian had worn black beautifully and accepted condolences with graceful sorrow. I'd watched from the crowd in disguise and felt nothing. Laurent, the general said suddenly. Your name, you said it was Laurent when you registered my injury. Yes, sir. You're too good at this to be a field medic fresh from training. I'm not fresh, sir. I've been in the Corps for 5 years. He was quiet while I worked, but I could feel him studying me. General Marcus Thorne was legendary, a commoner who'd risen through pure merit to become the youngest general in the kingdom's history. In my first life, my father's betrayal had destroyed his career. Half his regiment had walked into an ambush. The survivors had whispered that the general had wept over the bodies. He'd resigned his commission in shame. Then he'd stood in the front row at my execution and watched me die. But that was the old timeline. In this one, my father's treason hadn't happened yet. In this one, I'd spent 5 years positioning myself perfectly. I knew every betrayal before it occurred. I knew every secret my family would try to bury. I knew exactly when and how my father would make contact with enemy agents, which battles he'd sabotage, which intelligence he'd sell. And I knew that today, in this battle, General Thorne's adjutant was supposed to save his life, earning a promotion and the general's eternal gratitude. Instead, the adjutant had taken a cannonball to the chest 2 minutes ago. I'd seen it happen. I'd been close enough to reach the general first. Some things were destiny. Some things were choice. And some things were very careful planning by a woman who'd already died once. I tied off the final suture and wrapped a pressure bandage around his neck. You'll need proper surgery within the next 6 hours to clean the wound properly and check for deep tissue damage, I said. But this will keep you alive until then. You saved my life, he said, and there was something strange in his voice. I'm a medic, sir. It's what I do. No. He pushed himself up to sitting, one hand pressed to the bandage. You dragged me 30 feet through active fire. I was conscious for some of it. You took cover twice, waited for the shelling to pass, then kept moving. You knew exactly where you were going. Because I'd memorized every inch of this battlefield from military reports I'd read in my first life, because I'd known this battle was coming, and I'd volunteered for this specific field hospital assignment, because I'd spent 5 years becoming exactly the person who'd be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. But I couldn't tell him that. Training, sir, I said. Now we need to move. This position won't be tenable in The whistle of incoming artillery cut me off. I threw myself over him instinctively, feeling the impact as shrapnel tore through the air above us. Something hot grazed my shoulder. Pain flared, sharp and familiar. I'd been wounded in my first life, too, in a different battle. I knew this sensation. When the dust settled, the general was staring at me. You're hit. Flesh wound, I said, pushing myself up. It was barely. We need to move now, sir. He let me help him to his feet, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was a brilliant tactician. He was already adding things up, noticing inconsistencies. I'd have to be more careful. We made it back to the medical tent just as the kingdom's forces pushed the enemy into retreat. Around us, the organized chaos of battlefield medicine unfolded. Doctors shouted for supplies. Wounded men screamed or prayed or bled in silence. The smell of blood and antiseptic and smoke choked the air. I'd spent 5 years in this environment. I moved through it like a ghost, efficient and calm. I triaged, I assisted, I held hands when men died because there was nothing else to do. And through it all, I felt General Thorne's eyes on me. He should have been evacuated to the rear hospital. He refused. He stayed in the medical tent, his neck bandaged, watching me work. Other officers came to check on him. He waved them away. His gaze never left me. Finally, near midnight, when the last of the critical patients had been stabilized, he approached me. Walk with me, Medic Laurent. It wasn't a request. I followed him outside into the cool night air. The battlefield was quiet now, except for the distant sounds of burial details at work. Above us, stars shone with indifferent beauty. You're going to tell me the truth now, he said quietly. All of it. Sir, You knew exactly where I'd be hit. You were moving toward my position before I went down. I saw you. My blood went cold. I'd been too confident, too precise. The problem with knowing the future was that sometimes your knowledge showed. You're too educated for a field medic, he continued. Your accent slips sometimes. Pure nobility. Your surgical technique is better than most doctors I've seen. And there's something in your eyes when you look at me. Not admiration, not fear. Something else. Recognition. He stepped closer and I smelled blood and smoke and something underneath that was just him. You're running from something, he said. Or someone. And whatever it is, it's big enough that you'd rather risk your life in a war zone than face it. He was too clever. He'd always been too clever. In my first life, it was part of why he'd been so dangerous, a commoner with the tactical genius to threaten the established noble families. My father had feared him. That's why destroying him had been part of the plan. I could lie. I was good at lying now, 13 years of practice. But I looked at him, and saw something I'd forgotten from my first life. I'd been so focused on his face in the crowd at my execution, on his satisfaction at seeing an Ashford punished, that I'd forgotten what came before. I'd forgotten the younger General Thorne, before tragedy hardened him, before betrayal made him cruel. This version of him was still reachable. I'm running from my family, I said, which was true. They're not good people, sir. I'd rather die in honest combat than live under their control. Your family has that much power? Yes. He studied me for a long moment, then, What's your real name? I can't tell you that. Can't or won't? Both. He nodded slowly as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. You're noble born, high nobility from your accent. The medical corps doesn't do thorough background checks on volunteers, too desperate for bodies. You forged papers. I said nothing. Silence was safer than lies. I should report you, he said. Falsifying military documents is a serious crime. Yes, sir. But you saved my life. And you're a damn good medic. We need damn good medics. Hope flickered in my chest, small and dangerous. So here's what's going to happen, General Thorne said. You're going to continue serving as Medic Laurent. You're going to keep your secrets. And in exchange, you're going to serve in my personal staff medical unit. I need people I can trust, and anyone running from noble family politics is someone who won't be easily bribed or threatened by the court. It was perfect. It was better than perfect. Access to the general's inner circle, trust, proximity, everything I needed to prevent the betrayals that would come. Yes, sir, I said, Money. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Being close to me makes you a target. There are people who'd love to see me fail. People who think a commoner has no business commanding armies. His smile was sharp. People like whatever noble family you're running from, I'd wager. If only he knew. I can handle it, sir. I believe you can, Medic Laurent. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. That wound on your shoulder, get it properly cleaned and dressed. That's an order. Yes, sir. I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Then I let myself breathe. Phase 1 complete. I'd saved him. I'd earned his trust. I'd positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Now came the hard part. The next 6 months passed in a blur of battles and medical tents, of learning the general's staff and habits, of carefully, meticulously gathering the evidence I'd need. Because that was the true advantage of rebirth, not just knowing what would happen, but knowing how to prove it. In my first life, my father's treason had been discovered too late. By the time military intelligence realized they had a leak, dozens of soldiers were dead, and my father had already planted enough false evidence to frame me. He'd been careful, clever, insulated by wealth and noble privilege. But I knew his patterns now. I knew exactly when he'd make contact with enemy agents. I knew which officers he'd bribe, which servants he'd use as go-betweens, which codes he'd employ in his letters. More than that, I knew about the ledger. My father kept meticulous records of every transaction, every bribe, every secret sold, not out of sentimentality, but out of paranoia. He'd always feared his partners would betray him, so he maintained detailed evidence as insurance. In my first life, he'd hidden this ledger so well that even when he framed me, military intelligence never found it. He'd destroyed it the moment I was arrested, eliminating the only proof of his crimes. But I knew where he kept it. I'd discovered it accidentally in my first life, months before everything fell apart, while searching my father's study for a book. I'd been too naive then to understand what I was seeing, too foolish to take it seriously. Not this time. General Thorne's medical unit traveled with him everywhere, which meant I was there for every strategy meeting, every intelligence briefing, every discussion of enemy movements. I watched and listened and learned. And slowly, carefully, I began to notice the patterns. Small things. A battle plan that seemed sound but was subtly flawed in a way that would lead to casualties. Intelligence that arrived just a little too late to be useful. Supply routes that were compromised before they were officially announced. The leaks had already started. My father was already selling secrets. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof. But I also needed to be smart about this. If I moved too quickly, if I showed my hand too soon, my father would destroy the evidence and pin everything on someone else. Probably me, if he ever discovered I was alive. The breakthrough came during a brief period of leave. The army had pushed deep into enemy territory and needed time to resupply and fortify positions. Most of the officers returned to the capital for a few weeks. I requested leave as well, claiming family matters to attend to. General Thorne looked at me strangely when I submitted the request. I thought you were running from your family. I am, sir, but there's something I need to retrieve from their house, something important. Is this going to get you killed? Not if I'm careful. He studied me for a long moment. We'd grown closer over the past months, not friends exactly, but something more than officer and subordinate. He valued my medical skills. I thought he might even respect me, and sometimes I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Take Lieutenant Harrow with you, he said finally, as backup. Sir, I can't. That's an order, Medic Laurent. If you're walking into danger, you're taking someone who can fight. Lieutenant James Harrow was the general's most trusted aide, a serious young man with a tactical mind, nearly as sharp as Thorne's own. He was also loyal to a fault. In my first life, he'd been one of the few officers who hadn't immediately condemned me, not because he believed in my innocence, but because he believed in proper evidence and fair trials. Having him as backup was both a complication and an opportunity. We traveled to the capital in disguise, me as a governess, Harrow as my brother. The city was exactly as I remembered it. Grand boulevards and marble monuments, glittering shop windows and elegant cafes, all built on a foundation of noble privilege and common suffering. I'd loved this city once. Now it just made me tired. The Ashford mansion stood in the noble district, massive and imposing. Looking at it made my chest tight with old rage, old grief. This was where I'd grown up, where my father had taught me to dance and my mother had criticized my posture and my sister had stolen my toys and blamed me for breaking them, where they'd decided I was expendable. That's your family's house? Harrow said quietly. We were watching from a cafe across the street. I knew you were high nobility, but that's significant wealth. Yes. And you walked away from all of it. I walked away from what it cost to keep it. I took a sip of tea, watching the servants move behind the windows. My family isn't good people, Lieutenant. The money is stained. He didn't press further. That was one of the things I liked about Harrow. He understood boundaries. We watched for 3 days, learning the household patterns. My father kept to a strict schedule. Meetings in the morning, lunches with other nobles, evenings at his club. My mother spent her time on charitable committees that were really just excuses to gossip and scheme. My sister Vivian was engaged now to some earl's son, a strategic marriage that would further elevate the family's status. None of them knew I was alive. None of them suspected I was watching. On the 4th day, when I knew my father would be at Parliament and the rest of the family would be out for an afternoon garden party, I made my move. Getting into the house was easier than it should have been. I'd grown up there. I knew which servants could be bribed, which windows had faulty locks, which hallways the guards didn't patrol regularly. Harrow stayed outside his lookout while I slipped in through the music room window. The house smelled the same. Beeswax and roses and my mother's favorite perfume. It made my stomach turn. My father's study was on the 3rd floor behind a locked door that I'd watched him open 1,000 times. I knew the combination. My hands shook as I worked the lock. Not from fear, but from rage so old and deep it had calcified into something cold and hard in my chest. The door opened. I stepped inside. The study was exactly as I remembered. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, bookshelves crammed with volumes my father had never read but kept for appearance's sake. His desk sat, before a window overlooking the gardens, massive and imposing. Behind the desk was a painting of my grandfather, Duke Ashford III, stern, disapproving, dead for 20 years. In my first life, I'd discovered the ledger hidden behind that painting. I'd been looking for a particular book on botany for my studies. The book wasn't there, but when I'd moved the painting slightly, I'd felt a draft. Investigation had revealed a hidden compartment in the wall. I'd opened it out of curiosity and found my father's ledger. I'd flipped through it, confused by the codes and numbers and names. I'd been about to put it back when my sister had walked in. I'd hidden it quickly, made up some excuse about looking for father's reading glasses. Vivian had looked at me suspiciously but said nothing. I'd forgotten about it a week later. By then, I'd been too distracted by my upcoming debut, by the pressure to find a suitable husband, by my mother's constant criticisms. By the time I understood what I'd seen, it was too late. Now I moved to the painting with purpose, lifted it carefully off its hooks, found the hidden latch. The compartment opened. Inside was a leather-bound book, innocuous looking. I pulled it out with shaking hands and opened it to a random page. June 15th. Contact with E via intermediary. M. Information regarding 3rd Regiment deployment to eastern border. Compensation, 500 gold crowns. June 23rd. Intelligence regarding supply routes provided to E agent in exchange for continued support of tariff legislation. July 2nd. Warning to E regarding planned offensive. Compensation, 1,000 gold crowns plus guarantee of family holdings protection in event of invasion. Page after page of treason. Dates, amounts, specific pieces of intelligence sold, everything documented in my father's own hand. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. I heard footsteps in the hallway. My blood went ice cold. The household was supposed to be empty. I'd verified the schedule 3 times. The footsteps grew closer. I shoved the ledger into my bag, replaced the painting, and looked frantically for an escape route. The window was too high. The door was the only exit, and someone was about to walk through it. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, pulling a scalpel from my medical bag. It was a terrible weapon, but it was all I had. The door opened. Absolutely certain you saw someone enter? That was my mother's voice, sharp with suspicion. Yes, my lady, I saw movement in the study window. A servant. Male. One of the footmen. Father's study is locked. No one should be able to. My mother stepped through the doorway. I moved before she could turn, clamping one hand over her mouth and pressing the scalpel to her throat. Don't scream, I whispered. Don't move. She froze. I could feel her heart racing against my palm. The footman appeared in the doorway. His eyes went wide. I adjusted my grip so he could see the blade. Back away slowly, I said. Tell the guards there was a false alarm, a bird at the window. Do it now or I'll cut her throat. He stumbled backward, pale and terrified. I heard him calling down the hallway, his voice shaking. False alarm, just a bird. Everything's fine. When his footsteps faded, I released my mother slightly. She gasped for air. You're going to turn around slowly, Maki, I said. No sudden movements. She did, and when she saw my face, the color drained from hers. Alara? It came out as a whisper. But you're dead. You drowned. We buried you. You buried a body, I said. No, not me. I watched her process this. Shock, confusion, and this was what made me hate her most, calculation. Not relief that her daughter was alive, not joy. Calculation about what my survival meant for the family's plans. Does your father know? She asked. No one knows, and no one is going to know. I was never here. Alara, darling, whatever you think happened, don't. The word came out sharp as broken glass. Don't pretend you care. Don't pretend any of you ever cared. I know what you are. What all of you are. Her face hardened. There was my real mother, not the gentle society lady who threw charity galas, but the cold, calculating woman who'd raised me to be a pawn in her social games. You always were too sensitive, she said. Too emotional. That's why you never understood how the world really works. I understand perfectly. Father sells military secrets. You help him maintain his respectable cover. Vivian plays the perfect daughter while you both groom her for an advantageous marriage. And I was supposed to be another piece on your board, married off to whoever would give father the most political leverage. That's what noble daughters do, Alara. That's how families maintain power. That's treason. And when I'm done, everyone will know it. Something flickered in her eyes, fear. What did you take from the study? Insurance? Alara, please, whatever you think you're doing, it will destroy all of us. The family name is already destroyed. You just don't know it yet. I stepped back toward the window. I'm going to give you a choice, Mother. The same choice you gave me when you stood in court and said nothing while Father testified I was a traitor. You can scream for the guards right now, and I'll make sure this ledger reaches military intelligence by morning. Or you can let me walk out of here and maybe Maybe I'll show mercy when the time comes. You wouldn't dare expose your own family. I already died once because of this family. I have nothing left to lose. We stared at each other across the study. All the years of criticism and disappointment and conditional love crystallized into this moment. My mother, who'd taught me to curtsy and pour tea and smile at important men. My mother, who'd watched them execute me and shed pretty tears for the cameras. She stepped aside. I climbed out the window and onto the ledge, then down the trellis I'd used as a child when sneaking out to read in the gardens. Harrow was waiting in the alley behind the mansion, his hand on his sword. "Did you get it?" he asked. I held up the bag containing the ledger. "Everything we need." "You're bleeding." I looked down. In my haste climbing down the trellis, I'd torn my hand open. Blood dripped from my palm. I hadn't even felt it. "I'll live, I said. We need to move now." We were halfway back to our inn when I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the raw, terrible satisfaction of finally taking something back from the people who'd taken everything from me. General Thorne studied the ledger in silence for a long time. We were in his private quarters at the military headquarters outside the capital. Harrow stood guard outside the door. I sat across from the general and watched him read through page after page of my father's treason. Finally, he looked up. His face was unreadable. "Where did you get this?" "From my father's study." "Your father," he said slowly, "is Duke Cassius Ashford." There was no point denying it now. "Yes?" "And you're Lady Alara Ashford, who supposedly drowned 6 months ago." "Yes." "You faked your own death to escape your family and join the medical corps under an assumed name." "Yes." He set the ledger down carefully, as if it were a bomb. "Do you have any idea what this is? What he's done? These intelligence leaks?" His voice went rough with fury. "Half my regiment died in that ambush at Thornfield Pass. We walked into it blind because someone sold our battle plans to the enemy, and according to this, it was your father." "I know," I said quietly. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "Your father is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of soldiers. He's been selling secrets for years, and you're sorry?" "I didn't know," I said. "Not until recently. Not until—" I stopped. I couldn't tell him the whole truth. I couldn't explain that I'd known because I'd already lived through this once, already died because of it. Not until what? Not until I started noticing patterns in the intelligence leaks, small inconsistencies, and I remembered something I'd seen in my father's study years ago before I left. A hidden ledger. I thought it might be evidence. "So you went back? To the house of a man you'd faked your death to escape?" "Yes." He turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was complicated. Anger and respect and something else I couldn't name. "You risked your life to get this evidence. Someone had to stop him." "Someone—" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Lady Alara, this ledger will destroy your entire family. Your father will be executed for treason. Your mother and sister will lose everything. The Ashford name will become synonymous with betrayal. And you brought this to me knowing all of that." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I'd already lost everything once. Because I'd died for crimes I didn't commit while the real traitor walked free. Because I'd had 13 years to think about justice and revenge and what I owed to the soldiers who'd died because of my father's greed." "Because it's the right thing to do," I said. He studied me for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat down across from me again. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Were you involved? Did you know what your father was doing before you left?" "No, I swear on my life, General, I discovered the ledger by accident years ago and didn't understand what it meant. By the time I realized I was already gone, I only went back because I knew it would still be there." "And your mother and sister?" My mother knew. She always knew. My sister, I hesitated. I don't think she understood the full extent, but she knew something was wrong and chose not to ask questions. Complicit, either way. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then, what do you want me to do with this? The question surprised me. Sir? This is your family, your evidence. You risked everything to get it. So I'm asking you, what do you want me to do? In my first life, no one had asked what I wanted. They'd arrested me, tried me, and executed me without caring that I was innocent, without caring that I was afraid, without caring at all. Now General Marcus Thorne, the man who'd watched me hang, was asking me what I wanted. I want justice, I said, for everyone he's hurt, for all the soldiers who died. I want him to face trial and punishment for his crimes. I want the truth to come out, even if it destroys you in the process. I'm already dead, sir. Lady Alara Ashford drowned 6 months ago. I'm just Medic Laurent now. Except you're not. You can't disappear again after this. The moment this ledger goes to military intelligence, they'll investigate everyone connected to the Ashford family. They'll discover your faked death. They'll question everything. He was right. I'd known this was a possibility, but I'd been so focused on getting the evidence that I hadn't thought through the aftermath. The moment my father was arrested, the investigation would uncover everything. Then I'll face it, I said. Whatever happens, it's worth it to stop him. General Thorne looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Possibly both. He picked up the ledger. I'll take this to military intelligence tomorrow. I'll tell them it came from an anonymous source initially, but that I've verified the authenticity. That should give you some protection. Sir, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You saved my life, Medic Laurent. You brought me evidence of treason that will save countless more lives. The least I can do is try to keep you from being arrested in the process. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. Your father has powerful friends. When this comes out, there will be people who try to discredit the evidence to claim it's forged or politically motivated. You need to be prepared for that. I'd lived through worse. I'd been executed in a public square while crowds jeered. I could handle a scandal. I'm prepared, sir. Good. He stood, offering me his hand. Then let's make sure justice is served. I took his hand. His grip was firm and warm and steadying. For just a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this time, things would be different. That maybe this time, I wouldn't have to face everything alone. The arrest of Duke Cassius Ashford sent shockwaves through the kingdom. One moment, he was one of the most powerful nobles in the realm, and the next, military police were dragging him from his home in chains while crowds gathered to watch. The ledger was damning, undeniable, written in my father's own hand and corroborated by financial records and testimony from servants who'd been threatened into silence. Military intelligence moved quickly once they had the evidence, arresting not just my father, but the officers he'd bribed and the intermediaries he'd used. My mother and sister were brought in for questioning. Mother maintained her innocence with theatrical tears and claims of ignorance. Vivian said nothing, her face a perfect mask of shocked betrayal. Neither of them implicated the other, but I knew the truth. I'd lived through it once already. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. The kingdom demanded a public accounting, and the king, wanting to prove that even the highest nobility weren't above the law, agreed to an open tribunal. I watched from the gallery wearing my medical uniform and the name Laurent. No one recognized me. Why would they? Lady Alara Ashford was dead, and I was just another soldier in a sea of uniforms, come to watch justice be served. My father stood in chains before the tribunal. He looked smaller than I remembered, older. In my first life, he'd stood in this same courtroom and condemned me with cold precision. Now he was the one defending himself, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Good. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. The ledger entries, the financial transactions, the dates of intelligence leaks matched with the dates of battles gone wrong. They called witnesses, officers who'd taken bribes, servants who'd carried messages, enemy agents who'd been captured and offered immunity in exchange for testimony. Through it all, my father maintained his composure. He denied everything, claimed the ledger was forged, that enemies were framing him, that he'd always been loyal to the crown. Then they called their final witness. The tribunal calls medic Ilara Laurent to the stand. I stood, walked down to the witness box, felt every eye in the courtroom on me. The prosecutor was a sharp-faced woman named Colonel Vasquez. She'd been one of the officers most affected by my father's leaks. Her entire battalion had been decimated in an ambush. She had personal reasons to want justice. Medic Laurent, she said, please state your relationship to the defendant. He's my father. The courtroom erupted. Gasps and shouts and the thunder of the judge's gavel demanding order. My father's face went white. In the gallery, I saw my mother and sister, they'd been allowed to attend, staring at me in shock and horror. Order! The judge shouted. Order in this court! When the room finally quieted, Colonel Vasquez continued. You are Lady Ilara Ashford, daughter of the defendant, reported dead 6 months ago? I am. And you faked your death to escape your family? Yes. Why? Because they were going to use me as a scapegoat for crimes I didn't commit. Because I'd already died once and I refused to die again. Because I'd been given a second chance and I wasn't going to waste it. But I couldn't say any of that. Because I discovered evidence of my father's treason, I said, my voice steady. And I knew that if I confronted him directly, he would find a way to silence me. He's done it before to others who threatened him. So I disappeared. I made him think I was dead so I could gather the evidence needed to stop him. That's a lie, my father shouted from his seat. She was always unstable, always dramatic. This is revenge for some imagined slight. The defendant will remain silent, the judge said coldly. Colonel Vasquez approached me. Lady Ilara, can you explain how you obtained the ledger that forms the core of our case? I remembered seeing it years ago before I left. I was looking for a book in my father's study and accidentally discovered a hidden compartment behind a painting. Inside was this ledger. I didn't understand what it was at the time. I was young and naive. But later, when I began to notice patterns in military intelligence leaks, I realized what I'd seen. So I went back to retrieve it. And you brought this evidence directly to General Thorne? Yes. I'd been serving in his medical unit. I trusted him. Why General Thorne specifically? Because he'd lost men to my father's betrayal. Because I knew he would act on the evidence rather than bury it for political convenience. Because in another life he'd watched me die, and I needed him to see the truth this time. Because he lost half his regiment to an ambush that was caused by leaked intelligence, I said. I knew he would take it seriously. I knew he would demand justice for his men. Colonel Vasquez nodded. She turned to address the tribunal. The prosecution would like to note that Lady Ilara had everything to lose by coming forward. She could have destroyed the ledger, protected her family name, and continued her life in anonymity. Instead, she chose to expose her own father's crimes, knowing it would bring scandal and ruin to her family. This speaks to both her credibility and her courage. Objection, my father's lawyer said, standing. My client contends that the ledger is a forgery, created by his daughter as an act of revenge. She admits to faking her own death, to falsifying military documents, to breaking into private property. Her entire testimony is suspect. The ledger has been authenticated by 3 independent experts, Colonel Vasquez said. The paper, ink, and handwriting all match samples from the Duke's other documents. Multiple witnesses have corroborated the events described in its pages, and the financial records show payments matching the dates and amounts listed. Lady Ilara's character may be questionable to the defense, but the evidence is not. The judge nodded. The court will take all factors into consideration. Lady Ilara, you may step down. I walked back to my seat on shaking legs. As I passed my father, our eyes met. In that moment, I saw him realize what I'd done. Not just exposed him, destroyed him. Everything he'd built, every scheme he'd crafted, every ounce of power he'd accumulated, I'd taken it all away. And he knew he couldn't stop me. Not this time. The trial continued for another week. More witnesses, more evidence, more desperate denials from my father. But the outcome was never in doubt. The ledger was too detailed, too damning, too thoroughly corroborated. On the final day, the tribunal delivered their verdict. Duke Cassius Ashford, this court finds you guilty of high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of military officers, and selling state secrets to enemy forces. You are hereby sentenced to death by hanging, to be carried out within the fortnight. Your titles are stripped, your lands and assets forfeited to the crown. Your name will be entered into the rolls of traitors, and your family name is hereby attainted. My father screamed, raged, swore revenge even as guards dragged him away. I sat in the gallery and felt nothing, justice. Finally. My mother and sister were convicted as accessories. My mother for knowingly aiding the treason, my sister for accepting bribes and failing to report her father's crimes. They weren't sentenced to death, but they lost everything. Their titles, their wealth, their place in society. They were forbidden from using the Ashford name and exiled from the capital. I watched them led away in chains and felt a grim satisfaction. In my first life, they'd stood in court and destroyed me with their silence. Now they knew how it felt. After the trial ended, I stood outside the courthouse in my medical uniform, breathing in the cool evening air. It was over. I'd done it. I'd exposed the truth and seen justice served. Alara, I turned. General Thorne stood behind me, out of uniform for once, wearing simple civilian clothes. Sir, I said automatically, I think you can call me Marcus now. You're technically not under my command anymore. What do you mean? Military intelligence wants to question you about how you obtained the ledger. Breaking into a noble's house, even your father's, is still illegal, and falsifying your military service documents, they can't ignore that. My stomach dropped. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it still hurt. I understand. But, he continued, I've spoken to some people, called in some favors. General Wickham owes me for that business in the Eastern Campaign, and Colonel Vasquez was very impressed by your testimony. We've arranged for you to be granted clemency in exchange for your cooperation and service. Clemency? You'll be discharged from the medical corps. That's unavoidable given the falsified documents. But you won't face criminal charges, and you'll receive a full pardon for the break-in given the circumstances and the critical nature of the evidence you obtained. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He stepped closer. I've also arranged for your legal name to be changed to Alara Laurent. The Ashford name is attainted, so you can't use it anyway. But Laurent suits you. It's who you've been for the past 6 months, who you chose to be. You didn't have to do all this. Yes, I did. You saved my life, Alara, and you saved countless other lives by stopping your father. The kingdom owes you a debt. He paused. I owe you a debt. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. He was very close now, close enough that I could see the scar on his neck where I'd stitched him back together. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About being dead, about having nothing to lose, about choosing justice over family. Sir, Marcus, I watched you work for 6 months, Alara. Watched you save lives, watched you risk everything for people who didn't even know your name. And then I watched you walk into that courthouse and destroy your own family because it was the right thing to do. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How extraordinary? I didn't know what to say. No one had ever called me extraordinary. In my first life, I'd been disappointing, difficult, disposable. In this life, I'd been trying so hard to just survive that I hadn't thought about being anything else. I'm not extraordinary, I said quietly. I'm just someone who died once and didn't want to waste her second chance. His expression shifted, confusion, curiosity. What do you mean, died once? I'd said too much. The words had slipped out, born of exhaustion and relief, and the strange intimacy of this moment. Nothing, I just mean metaphorically. Lady Alara died when she drowned. I got a second chance to be someone different. He studied me and I could see him trying to puzzle something out, but finally he let it go. Well, whoever you are now, I'd like to get to know her better. He offered me his arm. There's a decent tavern near here. Let me buy you dinner. Consider it payment for saving my life. I should have said no. I should have walked away, kept my distance, protected the secrets I couldn't afford to share. But I was tired of being alone, tired of carrying everything by myself. So I took his arm. The next 2 years passed in a strange new rhythm. Without the medical corps, I needed a new purpose. Marcus, and it felt strange to call him that, but he insisted, helped me set up a private medical practice in the capital. I served veterans primarily, soldiers who'd been wounded in combat and needed ongoing care. Word spread quickly. The medic who'd exposed the traitor Duke, who'd saved General Thorne's life, who'd spent 5 years in field hospitals, she was accepting patients. Soon I had more work than I could handle. I loved it. Every patient saved felt like a repayment of the debt I owed to the soldiers who'd died because of my father's treason. Every life I preserved was a small act of atonement. Marcus visited often. At first, it was professional. He'd stop by to check on wounded soldiers from his regiment. But gradually, the visits became more personal. We'd have dinner, talk about medicine and military strategy and philosophy. He told me about his childhood as a blacksmith's son, about fighting his way up through the ranks. I told him carefully edited stories about my childhood, leaving out the parts that didn't make sense without explaining the rebirth. I liked him more than I should. In my first life, I'd seen him as an enemy, the general who'd rejoiced at my execution. But this version of Marcus, the one I'd saved and protected, was different, kinder, still brilliant, still driven, but without the bitterness that had hardened him after tragedy. Sometimes I wondered if saving him had changed more than just his survival. If preventing my father's betrayal from destroying his career had changed who he became. "You're thinking too hard," Marcus said one evening. We were having dinner at my practice, a simple meal of bread and stew eaten in my consultation room. "You get this look on your face when you're thinking too hard, like you're solving a puzzle no one else can see." "Sorry, just tired." Liar. But he smiled. "You can tell me to mind my own business if you want. But I've noticed you do that a lot. Drift away into your own head, like you're carrying something heavy." He wasn't wrong. I was carrying something heavy. The weight of 2 lifetimes, of knowledge that shouldn't exist, of memories that had shaped every decision I'd made for 13 years. "Everyone carries something," I said. "True, but most people don't carry it alone." He set down his spoon and looked at me seriously. "Alara, I know there are things you can't tell me. Things about your family, about why you really ran. And that's fine. You're entitled to your secrets. But if you ever want to share them, if you ever need someone to help carry the weight, I'm here." The offer made my throat tight. In my first life, no one had offered to help me. Everyone had been so quick to believe the worst, to abandon me, to watch me die. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." "Good." He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm and calloused. "Because I care about you, Alara Laurent. Quite a lot, actually." My heart stumbled. "Marcus, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." He squeezed my hand gently. "You saved my life. And somewhere along the way, you became the best part of it." I should have pulled away, should have remembered that I was living on borrowed time with borrowed knowledge, that any relationship I built was founded on secrets I could never share. But I didn't pull away. "You're the best part of mine too," I said quietly. He smiled, bright and genuine, and something in my chest that had been frozen since my execution began to thaw. My father was executed on a cold morning in November. I didn't attend. I had no desire to watch him die, no need for that final closure. The fact of his death was enough, but I heard about it afterward, how he'd maintained his innocence to the end, how he'd cursed my name, called me ungrateful and treacherous, how he'd died badly, struggling against the noose. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no grief, just a quiet sense of completion. Justice had been served. My mother and sister had been exiled to a small estate on the northern border, a property that hadn't been part of the Ashford holdings and thus hadn't been seized. It was barely large enough to support them, and they had no servants, no luxuries, none of the comforts they'd taken for granted. I heard through various sources that my mother had aged badly, her beauty destroyed by stress and poverty, that Vivian's engagement had been broken, her fiancé's family wanting no association with a trader's daughter, that they lived in near poverty, struggling to maintain even basic dignity. Good. Let them know what it felt like to lose everything. Let them know what they'd done to me. Marcus told me I should feel guilty for not helping them, for having the power to ease their suffering. I was doing well enough in my practice that I could have sent money, and choosing not to. They're still your family, he said gently. They stopped being my family the day they decided I was expendable, I replied. I owe them nothing. He didn't push. That was one of the things I loved about him. He respected my boundaries even when he disagreed with my choices. Yes, loved. I'd fallen in love with Marcus Thorne and I hadn't meant to, hadn't planned for it. In my first life, he'd been my enemy. In this life, I'd saved him as part of a larger plan to prevent my father's treason. I'd never expected to actually care about him. But I did. Deeply, terribly, wonderfully. He proposed on a spring evening 2 years after the trial. We were walking through the royal gardens, watching the cherry blossoms drift on the wind. Elara Laurent, he said, dropping to one tease, knee in the path. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I stared at him, at the ring in his hand, simple silver with a small sapphire, nothing ostentatious. At his face, hopeful and nervous and so dear to me. You want to marry a dead woman? I said, and laughed because the alternative was crying. I want to marry you, however you define yourself, whatever secrets you're keeping. He stood up, taking my hand. I know there are things you haven't told me. About your family, about why you really ran, about how you sometimes know things you shouldn't know. And that's fine. I don't need to understand everything about you to know that I love you, that I want to spend my life with you. Marcus, you can say no. I'll understand if you do, but I'm asking anyway because life is short and uncertain, and I don't want to waste the time we have. His grip tightened. You saved my life, Elara. Let me spend the rest of it trying to make you happy. I thought about my first life, about dying alone, unmourned, unloved, about spending 13 years planning revenge and protecting myself and never letting anyone close. I thought about this life, about the clinic I'd built, the patients I'd saved, the difference I'd made, about Marcus's visits and his terrible jokes, and the way he looked at me like I was something precious, about the possibility of happiness I'd never thought I deserved. Yes, I said, yes, I'll marry you. He kissed me there in the garden under the cherry blossoms, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt like I was truly alive. We married in a small ceremony with only close friends attending. General Wickham gave me away. Colonel Vasquez cried, which surprised everyone, including herself. Lieutenant Harrow served as best man and made a surprisingly emotional toast about courage and second chances. I wore a simple dress, not the elaborate gown I'd planned for my debut in my first life. We exchanged vows in a small chapel, promising to love and support each other through whatever came. And when the priest pronounced us married, when Marcus kissed me as his wife, I felt something I'd thought was lost forever. Hope. We settled into married life easily. Marcus was away often on military assignments, but he always came home. And when he did, we'd sit up late talking about his campaigns and my patients, about philosophy and ethics, and whether the world was getting better or worse. I never told him about the rebirth. How could I? It was too strange, too impossible. He'd think I was mad. But sometimes I wondered if he suspected something. He'd catch me staring into space with a haunted expression, or I'd accidentally reference something I shouldn't know, and he'd give me that puzzled look. He never pressed. He'd made a promise to love me despite my secrets, and he kept it. 3 years after our marriage, I received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, the paper cheap. It took me a moment to recognize my sister's hand. Elara, mother is dying. Consumption, the doctors say. She has perhaps a month left. She's asking for you, begging for you. I know you have no reason to come. I know what we did to you, or rather what we failed to do. We stood by while father destroyed you, and then we mourned you falsely when we thought you were dead. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even think I deserve it, but mother is suffering. And in her lucid moments, she weeps for you. She says your name over and over. She says she's sorry. I'm sorry too, for what it's worth. I was young and scared, and I chose wrong. I chose our father over my sister, and I've regretted it every day since. You don't owe us anything, but if there's any mercy in your heart, please come. Let mother see you one last time. Let her make her peace before she dies. Your sister, Vivian. I read the letter 3 times. Then I showed it to Marcus. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me says she doesn't deserve my mercy. She stood by while father framed me for treason I caught myself. In my past. She said nothing in my defense. But another part? Another part remembers her as my sister. Before everything went wrong. Before father's corruption poisoned everything. I folded the letter carefully. She taught me to braid my hair. We used to sneak cookies from the kitchen together. She used to be not good, maybe, but not entirely evil either. Then maybe that's your answer. Go see them, not for their sake, but for yours. So you can have closure. So you can look yourself in the mirror and know you were the bigger person. He was right. I'd spent so much time being angry, being focused on revenge and justice. Maybe it was time to let some of it go. I traveled north alone to the small estate where my mother and sister lived. It was a drafty, uncomfortable place, clearly maintained on a shoestring budget. The gardens were overgrown, the paint was peeling. Vivian met me at the door. She'd changed dramatically, no longer the polished society beauty, but a woman worn down by hardship. Her dress was patched, her hands rough from work. Elara, she said, and her voice broke. Thank you for coming. How is she? Fading. She's lucid today, but she's very weak. The doctors say it won't be long now. I followed her upstairs to a small bedroom. My mother lay in a narrow bed, her face drawn and gray. She looked decades older than she was, consumed by illness and regret. When she saw me, tears spilled down her cheeks. Elara, my daughter, you came. I came, I said, sitting beside the bed. I'm so sorry. Her voice was barely a whisper. For everything. For not protecting you. For choosing your father over you, for being too weak and too ambitious to do what was right. I'd imagined this moment countless times over the years. In my fantasies, I'd been cold, unforgiving. I'd made her beg for forgiveness and then denied it. Her. I'd made her feel the pain she'd caused me. But looking at her now, this broken, dying woman, I felt only pity. I'm not going to say it's okay, I said quietly, because it wasn't. What you did, what father did, what all of you did, it destroyed me. I had to become someone else entirely to survive it. I know. But I'm not going to let it destroy me anymore. I'm not going to carry this hatred for the rest of my life. I took her hand. It was cold and thin, barely more than bones. I forgive you, Mother. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. She wept then, harsh sobs that shook her frail body. Thank you, oh, thank you. I stayed with her until she fell asleep. Then I joined Vivian downstairs in the small sitting room. Thank you, my sister said, for giving her that. She's been so tortured by guilt. She should have been, I said. But she's paid enough. You both have. Vivian nodded. She poured tea with shaking hands. Cheap tea, nothing like what we'd grown up drinking. I'm sorry, too, for my part in everything. I was young and stupid, and I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I just didn't make waves, everything would be fine. I didn't realize Father would... She stopped. That's not an excuse. I should have spoken up. I should have protected you. Yes, I said simply. You should have. I know I don't have the right to ask, but she looked at me with desperate eyes. Are you happy? Did you find a life worth living after everything we did to you? I thought about my clinic, my patients, my reputation as a skilled physician. I thought about Marcus, about the life we were building together, about the possibility of children someday, of a future that was mine to shape. Yes, I said. I'm happy. I built a new life from nothing, and it's better than anything I could have had as an Ashford. Good. She smiled, sad and genuine. That's good. You always deserved better than our family could give you. We talked for a few hours more. Not about the past, there was too much pain there, but about small things. Her attempts at gardening, my work at the clinic, the weather, inconsequential matters that let us be sisters again for just a little while. When I left, she hugged me goodbye. I don't expect you to visit again, she said. I know we don't deserve your time or attention, but thank you for this. Thank you for not letting us die completely alone. Take care of yourself, Vivian, I said. I rode home feeling lighter. I'd confronted my past and chosen mercy over vengeance. It felt right. It felt like finally closing a door that had been open for too long. My mother died 2 weeks later. Vivian sent a brief note informing me of the death and thanking me again for coming. She didn't ask me to attend the funeral, and I didn't offer. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. 5 years into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I'd died once without ever experiencing motherhood. Now I had the chance to bring new life into the world, to raise a child the right way, with love and support instead of manipulation and conditional affection. Marcus was overjoyed. He'd been promoted to field marshal by then, the youngest in the kingdom's history, and his success combined with my medical practice meant
Thanks for watching.